really good program. I want to welcome everybody. We really appreciate you being in this beautiful pecan room of Crow Holdings. What a great honor that we were able to be here. Just have two quick announcements. One is we will be still having a December Christmas party, holiday party we've always had, but it's under discussion and I can't tell you exact details yet until we get it finalized, but you can be expecting an email coming about that. We also will have another landmarking at the famous pecan tree on Armstrong Parkway on December 5th, which is a Thursday night. So the city always has a little program there for that lighting, and we will be a part of it. So I hope that the Historical Preservation Society is well represented at that too. Now, I had one aside. I want to tell you, among our group is Patty Pritchett, and Patty had her mother lived in this dormitory in 1933, so I thought that was such a good story. She's in the back over there. So we have great speakers, and one of our founding members of the Historical Society is Lyndalyn Adams, and Lyndalyn is going to introduce our two speakers, and I'll ask her to come up at this time. Low enough for you. It'll catch your voice. That's good.
So.
Okay.
Yes. Thank you, Al. She finally made it. She's growing old in service to history. Yes, I was one of the founding members, and so was one of our speakers tonight. It's such a joy to be able to introduce these two gentlemen. I mean, we're all three friends of long standing, shall we say. So both are outstanding in their way and in their field, and they both were eyewitnesses to this terrible tragedy that happened in our city 50 years ago. Both are marvelous speakers, and you'll see them on CBS this Sunday. Bob Schieffer's Face the Nation, and on many other ways. They have been interviewed by persons from all through the world, and because they have such a riveting tale to tell about their experiences. So it's unique in its way that we have these two together. One has been, as I say, one of the founders of the Park Cities Historical Society, and remains active in so many things in Dallas you wouldn't believe, and it's hard to pin him down with just how many boards. He doesn't mention that, but he is a native son of the Park Cities. He was a graduate of Highland Park High School, and then went to SMU, where he made, waves there. He's always been outstanding. I think he was a cheerleader, but he wouldn't admit to that probably. But after graduation, he went into the military, and of all things, he was in the Strategic Air Command. And just think of that back then when they were flying all over the world and with atomic bombs. I mean, this is an incredible time. So after his service of the military, he came back home, and he has a trained voice in journalism and speaking, and so he was the DJ at several of our radio stations in Dallas for quite some time. And then he went to WFAA, where he became the youngest person in the United States to head programming and be a station manager of a major radio station. Then SMU called him again. Willis Tate was in touch with him and asked him to come back to SMU and head up as executive director of the SMU Alumni Association, where I think he spearheaded the campaign to build a brand new alumni house and headquarters there at SMU. When he was with WFAA, he pulled that whole organization together to a really active, modern, entity, and they moved their operation of WFAA into Communication Center there, where they still are, actually. So, following that, Pchs has been, as I say, involved in so many things, and particularly all of the history organizations, I think, in this whole area. And he is a valued member of each and every one. One thing I left out, and I love this, is that when he attended SMU, was on a Dallas Morning News scholarship, and he carried a Dallas Morning News paper route from junior high through college, along with 4-time jobs. Now that's Pchs, and he is amazing. He will tell you about his touch of history and what happened to him on that terrible day. And he's an outstanding speaker you will enjoy hearing. If I have your indulgence, I'm introducing both speakers. It's not a pretty sight to get me right up out of a chair. So our next speaker, following Pchs, is another longtime friend. And he was born in Harrison, Arkansas, was an undergraduate at the University of Arkansas, graduated from the University of Tennessee School of Medicine, and interned at LA General Hospital, University of California. He completed a general practice residency, the whole residency, at the University of Oklahoma, followed by a residency in general surgeon at Parkland Memorial Hospital, and here we are, part of the old Parkland. He joined the staff and faculty of the University of Texas Southwestern Medical School, where he rose to be a professor of surgery and acting chairman of the Department of Surgery for several years. In 1987, he was recruited to Baylor Healthcare System, Baylor University Medical Center, as chief of surgery. And he just stepped down last year from that position, but is still with the department. And this is interesting to any of you physicians here, his service was accredited with 46 residents in his program in a surgery department that is not directly connected to a medical school. So it's just really almost unheard of. And he is a fabulous physician and lecturer, and has a tale to tell you that you will never forget. So this is a wonderful night to celebrate that terrible thing that happened to us, and certainly to the President of the United States 50 years ago. My pleasure to introduce Pchs Allman.
Oh my. Thank you, Lindy. Can't tell you how grateful I am to the Park Cities Historical Society for the title of Young Reporter at Dealey Plaza. Love it. I was actually the only 10-year-old on the staff. How many of you remember where you were when you heard about Kennedy?
Yes.
Now listen to what I said. When you heard about Kennedy, not read. One of the seminal events of that weekend was the birth of electronic journalism. The death of Kennedy was a television radio event, and it marked the advent of television as the prime news medium. And so the next morning, I was watching our coverage out at Love Field, and a throng of people, which will not happen again, and of course, you've seen the last motorcade of its kind ever. But here was this adoring crowd pressing in on the airplane. He came down the plane. Jackie was given the roses by Deary Cattle. And then you could see the consternation on the face of the Secret Service guy behind Kennedy, because the minute he came down, there were guidelines on the tarmac about what to do, and he ignored them, and he went to the fence where the people were, started shaking hands. And I looked at that and I thought, this guy is a natural. He is so good. What finely honed political skills. So we were getting reports from downtown, 300,000 people, 7, 8 deep on the streets. And Kennedy had told, when he lost the bubble top at Love Field, he also told the Secret Service, don't walk by the car. I want the kids, the people to be able to get up there. And in some places, the car could barely get through. So the crowds were wildly cheering. The day turned out to be pretty. The sun came out, day like today, nothing could go wrong. Just absolutely marvelous. So I thought at the last minute, about 5 after 12, I thought I'd leave the studio and walk over about 4 blocks to the depository building and watch the motorcade. And I was walking out, and one of the radio salesmen came up and he said, where are you going? I said, I'm going to watch the motorcade. You want to go? He said, yeah. So we started walking over. About a block in, there was a young man having an epileptic seizure. And an ambulance was in the territory, and the attendant got out, and they attended to him and took him. And this turned out to be the same ambulance that was on duty at Parkland, and the attendant that aided Jackie in putting Kennedy's body into the coffin, and also witnessed that ring exchange. I talked to him afterwards, fascinating story. We got a little further, and I kept looking up at the rooftops, at all the open windows in those high buildings, and thought, how in the world do they secure all this? And I turned to my colleague and said, you know, if there were going to be such thing as an assassination attempt, this would probably be the place. Don't know why I said that. Walked on a little further and then stood on the corner opposite the front door of the depository building, waited for the motorcade, and here it came, that marvelous blue limo. And I didn't even notice John and Nellie in the jump seat. I was just struck by that first couple. I thought, that's what a president and first lady ought to look like. Jackie had that little pink hat on, the pink outfit, and she had this kind of big smile and a little wave like that. And JFK, she was closest to me about where they are, and Mr. Kennedy was on the other side, and he would brush the forelock off his forehead. He had this sort of, it wasn't a wave, it was just sort of a, thank you for being here type thing. And I was just so struck by them that I remember calling out something like, hey, welcome to Dallas, Mr. President. And they turned the corner, and boom, that first sound. And that is something you never forget. A rifle makes kind of a flat crack sound. This was a boom. This had a lot of reverb to it, and there was a lot of hard surface all over. And it didn't dawn on anyone at the time, except Connolly said later that he recognized it as a shot, but it didn't dawn on anyone that it was a shot. Figured backfire, firecrackers. I had turned to Terry and said something about, if that's a firecracker, it's important. But at the same time, I looked up, and on the 5th floor, in that 5th floor corner window, there were 3 guys hanging out and looking up and pointing up. And I glanced up at the 6th floor, and to this day, I couldn't tell you if I saw a rifle barrel or not, because at that time, boom, the second shot. The total time, probably from turning the corner to hitting the triple underpass, was about 20 seconds. And from the first shot through the last shot was about 6 seconds. So when the second shot was heard, then it is shooting. And time gets a little bit elastic, and you begin compartmentalizing intellectual and emotional. Because intellectually, you see what's going on, and it registers, and you process it, but emotionally, there's a total air of unreality that this is not taking place in my hometown. On the second shot, Kennedy did not have a real violent reaction. It was almost a flinch. He was sitting there and sort of went to his left, a little bit back. His right arm had been on the edge of the limo, and his right arm came up and his right hand started up, and then his left arm and his left hand, and he went sort of like this. And when his left arm started down, Jackie had turned towards him and had both hands, and she sort of, primarily with the right hand, sort of went under his left arm and was kind of supporting it. He never toppled over. And I think, as Ron will point out, it was because he was wearing a back brace. It was very tightly laced. And there's some speculation about the role of the back brace, because had he toppled over at that stage, he would not have presented the same upright target for the assassin. And the car kept moving. The car never slowed. The car never took corrective action. It never curved. And then, third shot. And Kennedy had a pretty violent reaction to that. I had momentarily glanced sort of beyond the car and was looking up on the hill, trying to see if anything else was going, and glanced back. And he had kind of gone back and forth and then totally to the left. And Jackie was screaming. And Clint Hill, who was assigned to Jackie, Secret Service man, had been a couple of cars back, and he had been hanging on the running board of that car trying to keep a line of sight. And the minute he heard the first shot, as he said later, he knew what had happened. And he started running as fast as he could, and right after that third shot, he got to the rear of the limo, and he had a foot on the bumper. He was trying desperately to get over the left rear fender of the limo, and he barely made it. He was really hanging on, started saying, "Go, go, go." And Jackie had reacted towards the president and then turned and climbed up on the back seat and then started out over the back of the car. And I guess it would have been easy to think that she was trying to help Secret Service man get on the car. It was erroneously reported by Life magazine and others that she was trying to get out. And what she actually was doing was trying to retrieve a piece of skull from her husband. And she did, by the way. She grabbed it, and when Hill pushed them both down in the back of the car, she held on to it. And when she got to the hospital, she gave the attendant that bit of brain matter from her husband. Remarkable woman. The limo paused momentarily and then took off. The guys in the front seat of the car were turned around and were looking up and back at the sixth floor, pointing. And a motorcycle cop had gotten off his motorcycle and came running towards me and said, "Get down." And I got down momentarily and thought, no, I've got to get up. I've got to get to a phone. Now, there was no portable equipment in those days. You know, we were using old wind-up Super 8 cameras for film. You had the old-fashioned tape recorder. If you didn't have a phone, you were out of touch. And I thought, okay, the closest phone is going to be in the depository building. It doesn't dawn on you that that's where the assassin or assassins are and might want to, get out. And I turned and ran a little bit that way, and then cut across the street and stopped at a young couple who had their two little boys. It was Bill and Gail Newman, whom I met later. And I don't know why, they were flat on the ground, and I said, "Are you okay?" And he rolled over and he looked up and he said, "Yeah, but they got the president. They blew the side of his head in." So I'm hearing that. Bill's on that side, I was on this side. And I ran a little further up the so-called grassy knoll and then turned around. I said, "I've got to get to the depository building." So I ran along the sidewalk and ran up the steps, and the door was sort of half open. There was a guy standing in the doorway. And I said, "Where's a phone?" And he said, "In there." I said, "Thank you," and went on in. And I got the only phone in the lobby. It was the old black handset. And I was the only one there. This is about 2 minutes after the shooting, and I realized that I've got to say something. Intellectually, I see what's happening. Emotionally, I'm still having a problem with it, and I'm thinking, what do you say? My inclination was to say the president's been shot. And what? Where'd he go? Hospital? What's his condition? I wasn't sure about that second shot. There was no blood, and I wasn't sure, did it hit his shoulder? Did it graze him? I just wasn't sure at all, and I didn't see the Conley reaction. The third shot, pretty obviously a big hit, but you don't go on the air and say the president's been killed. That would have been totally irresponsible, speculative. And you're operating on instinct now. And my instinct was anything I say has to be something I actually know, that I feel very solid on. So if I were to say he's been shot, what, once or twice? What's the condition? It just didn't feel right. It didn't feel comfortable. Let me tell you the other thing that was flipping through my mind. And this is very much the mindset of anyone who was there for 72 hours, was that this is a conspiracy, and probably a Russian conspiracy. And I thought, okay, I go on the air and say the president's been shot, who's listening? And someone says, okay, phase one, kick in phase two. And what is that? More bullets on the motorcade, Love Field being bombed, something happening in D.C. It may sound far-fetched, but I did not want to be responsible for World War III. So I don't remember what I said. I heard the tape later. It's in the National Archives. And 3 shots, witnesses said he was hit. We did not confirm that he was hit. And I've thought about that several times, but I thought it was the thing to do. So I was the only one in the building on the phone communicating with the outside world, and I never thought about that. I was just looking around. It was chaos in the lobby. I stayed on the phone about 30, 40 minutes. Luke Mooney, one of the sheriff's deputies, had found the shell casings up on the 6th floor, brought them down. I got that on the air. They found the rifle. Brought that down, we got that on the air. So now we've pretty well established this is what happened, this is where it happened, and it was the 6th floor, and it was the sniper's perch, and 3 shots. And then finally someone asked who I was calling and suggested I get off the phone, so I tried to get out of the building, and it was cordoned off. And I showed ID and then ran all the way back to the studio, and I walked in, and the first thing I asked, I've forgotten who the guy was standing in the doorway, but I said, is the president dead? They said, yes. So I went in and did a quick live video feed and then went up to the control room, and for 3 days and 3 nights, we were busy then with the story. Who is this guy Oswald? Where did he come from? What's he doing here? What really happened? And it went on, and we were dealing with news people from all over the world by 6 o'clock. And by 6 or 7 o'clock that night, 97% of the television sets owned in the United States were turned on, and they stayed on. The follow-up, I guess, to that is about 3 weeks later, the Secret Service called and asked if they could visit, and I said, sure. And they came to the office, and they wanted to know where I was standing and where I ran and how much time, and the person in the doorway. What was he standing? Where was he standing? What did he say? And what were his gestures? And we went through this 4 or 5 times. And they finally said, are you familiar with the testimony of Lee Oswald after his arrest? I said, no. I said, well, he states that as he was leaving the depository building, a young man with a crew cut rushed up and identified himself as a newsman and asked where a phone was. And based on what you say and based on what he said, this is obviously you. Can you give us any further identification? I said, no. It would be power of suggestion. I've described him as best I could. He was very calm, was not breathless, was not in a hurry. But no. And we went through it again. They left, and I didn't run down the hall to the newsroom, didn't tell anybody. I just sat there and tried very hard to remember everything I could about that encounter and realized it would be fruitless, that it was all, at that stage, power of suggestion. And I guess that it becomes part of your life. You like to think that it doesn't, but it does. To think that, you know, you happen to be there and you happen to run into that person, and that causes you to do a little what if. The guy that gave the key testimony to the Warren Commission, Howard Brennan, was sitting on a wall behind me. And he had looked up earlier, and he saw Oswald in the window with the rifle. He thought he was security. And then he saw Oswald shooting, and he gave the description to the Warren Commission that they relied on so heavily. And I thought, okay, what if I had looked up earlier? If I would have looked up at the same time, would I have seen him? And would I have recognized him enough so that in my haste later to get to a phone and he's there, would I have, would I have said, hey, you're the guy in the window? Would I put an arm out or tried to, I don't know. It's one of those what ifs. And now and then, because of that, you get, now and then you get a little twinge of guilt whether or not you could have saved Tippett's life. It doesn't alter history, but it just is a feeling that, sort of stays with you. So anyway, Oswald is now gone, and Kennedy is now at the hospital. And to tell you more about that, my distinguished colleague, Dr. Ron Jones.